and welcome everybody to the next chapter of PERC's Next Practices web series, where we've been looking at a number of different issues and different perspectives on the current global pandemic that we're facing and some of the challenges that are faced by regulators and operators and consumers alike. Today, we are very pleased to be joined by Peter Twesigye, who is the Manager of Regulatory Affairs at Umeme in Uganda. Umeme is the main distribution company in Uganda, operating under a 20-year concession with the government. They are a distribution utility, so they receive all of their power from the transmission company that also operates as the system operator. So their only job is getting power to the people. And so I kind of like to start with that. And Peter asked, so, you know, in Umeme's role as getting power to the people, what have been some of the challenges that you have seen, both from the utility perspective, the consumer perspective, and the perspective of your own employees?
Thank you very much, Ted, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon to participants in different time zones. Yeah, as a utility, I think some of the key challenges we've noticed that comes with this pandemic is of course, breeds a lot of anxiety among the consumers of all categories, from manufacturers, from the domestic households, the commercials. So I think right now that's the genesis of all the challenges that we are facing, in a sense that from the manufacturers' side, they face a lot of challenges to do with the supply chain constraints. Of course, most of these suppliers get their materials and inputs from China, importing from China, and then this is where the pandemic started. And of course, this has a multiplier spillover onto the delays in transportation and accessing materials to make connections for domestic households, for the commercials. And of course, it spirals over to all the other business activities of the company in terms of the timelines you're supposed to deliver CapEx projects, the timeline is supposed to effect new connections. So that's the kind of tension that there is in the world and we are facing as a utility. But of course, as the pandemic has been going on, and as we go along, the situation is quite too dynamic. What happens today is different from what happens tomorrow. And so we've seen a lot of changes and announcements from the authorities, especially from the president and the governments, making pronouncements on what measures are being taken on a daily basis. The measures that were taken last week are different from what have been taken this week. So last week, I must say that Uganda was one of the countries that did not get infections registered or pronounced immediately. But over the last 1.5 weeks, there's been 44 cases registered in the space of 1.5 weeks. So that has caused a lot of anxiety. And so the robust and more constrictive lockdown and curfews been imposed that has made people even more worried and anxious, you know, what they are going to do. But that aside, as a utility, how do you address the concerns of the consumers in such an environment is the key question that we are dealing with. And so, of course, what people want is reliable supply. So amidst the curfew and the restrictions on travel and self-isolation and no movements, what people want being in their home is a reliable supply. And so the company has taken measures to ensure that reliability is prioritized by all means to ensure that people have access to electricity and lights are kept on 24/7 at home, and that the factories and industries that are still operational have uninterrupted supply all through. So this again goes into the measures that have been taken, one of which is ensuring that all planned maintenance works has been suspended, all planned capital works projects have been suspended, new connections have also been suspended and rationalized in a non-conventional way, that we still have to make a few that are necessary, but not at the same pace as what we've been doing before. Of course, the other aspect is meter reading, which is a critical aspect of the business. Meter readings for installations and connections that do not have prepaid meters have to postpone the meter reading, and those will be we'll have to use an estimation method to ensure that we can capture that. Yes, Ted.
Now, Umeme, as I mentioned in the introduction, Umeme is the distribution company. So you don't have control of every aspect of the supply chain. How important have partnerships been for Umeme? Partnerships either with the government, or the transportation company, or the power producers? What role have partnerships played in making sure that the lights stay on for folks?
Thank you, Ted. Thank you for that. So to give it a broader perspective, is at a national level, there is a national task force that's supposed to coordinate all the business activities in the country from all sectors of the country. But below the national task force is what we call the interagency joint task force, which is mainly looking at the key priority sectors of the economy. And you're looking at energy, you're looking at Ministry of Health, you're looking at water, you're looking at security, you're looking at banking and telecoms. So these have a specific group through which certain activities and action plans are being deliberated on a daily basis. So the partnerships that have taken place have really been geared towards ensuring that there is some level of business continuity and everything does not come to a halt. So, and this has involved, has required engaging the suppliers, especially those that are into supply chain, to importation of critical equipment from abroad, through the tax body, which is the revenue authority that manages and immigration and customs, that ensure there is a smooth handling and swift inflow of critical materials and equipment. And then at more at a utility level, it is to do with the engagement of the sector-wide segments and the utilities involved. So the transmission company and the various power generation companies are communicating on a daily basis, and even on using digital platforms to ensure there is a common understanding on of the challenges that we are facing, and assurances and reassurances on guarantees on how there will be continuity in payments that are due to each of them. Especially the generators really have standing PPAs, so there is an obligation to ensure that the PPA commitments are honored on a monthly basis. The suppliers, of course, we have, for those that we have framework agreements for supply of critical equipment, those we have an understanding that they will continue to supply the equipment and their payment will be guaranteed or assured as per the agreed terms. But I think the key issue is that there is need for direct engagement. And when I say direct engagement, I don't mean face-to-face discussions, because we are trying to emphasize social distancing, but more frequent communication using digital platforms, emails, Zoom calls, and meetings, really to ensure that everyone understands what is required.
So in this interagency working group that you were talking about, that existed prior to the present crisis. That's a standing organization in Uganda, correct?
No, unfortunately, this has been created now in the face of the pandemic. So it is critical because of the need to respond to the needs of the consumers and the population for services that must be provided even in the midst of this pandemic. So that's why the key members really are the energy, water sector, telecoms, banking, security agencies, and of course the tax body. And as I mentioned, even the laws are being revised interestingly, and Parliament has been asked to be on standby. Parliamentary subcommittees have been asked to be on standby to make sure they make amendments to the laws that can provide legal basis for certain decisions and directives that the president issues so that they are implemented in accordance with the law. So it is critical that, so it is critical that even when directives issued by the president to be implemented in the circumstances, they must have a legal basis. So Parliament is fast-tracking these by making amendments to the existing laws to enable for these modifications.
So who took the first step? Who said, look, this is a crisis that we haven't seen this before. We're going to need to bring all these folks together and talk about the impact on providing people with essential services. Who first brought up the idea that, hey, we've got to put this group together? And then who was the catalyst that said, okay, I'm going to take it. I have the authority. I have the responsibility. I'm going to pull these folks together.
I think this came from the Ministry of Health, being the custodian or the champion in being the lead agency in the fight against the pandemic, and having the prescriptive preventive maintenance measures, and being the chief advisor to the president. They were the ones who proposed that such a team should be constituted, and it was on this advice that the president actually convened this and asked that it should be formed. This interagency group should be formed to ensure continuous service delivery to the people.
But how long did it take to bring everybody together from the first point where the Ministry of Health said we got to do something here to the point where you got everybody together? How quickly did that all come to turn into a group that can actually take action?
Yeah, so because the people, the population had been following the news, what was happening in China and Italy and Europe and the USA, there was quite a lot of awareness on what the potential risks and impacts can be. So it took not more than 4 days, because everyone was already aware that when you get a number of infections in the country, you need to act so fast. So it didn't take long. So I think most were about 4 days, and the team was put together.
Wow, that's very impressive.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know we've talked a bit about the supply chain in general. I know you addressed this a little bit with your with the connections, the policy on new connections. But are there special things that Umeme is doing to take into account the impact of all of this on the employees?
Okay, now when we get to the employees, really, this is the heartbeat of the company, the heartbeat of the business, of the service we are providing. So it was critical to ensure that there is one assurance to staff that their safety is guaranteed and that their health is priority. So there was, of course, one of the things that was done was continuous engagement through workshops. That was before there was actually any registered cases in the country. So workshops within departments to brief and educate the staff about the dangers of the pandemic, COVID-19. But after that, of course, there was also need for continuous information flow, legitimate information. And this of course, was in form of memos to all staff to ensure that they are getting the correct information and not the fake news that was awash in social media and from various sources that could not be authenticated. So the other issue that was addressed was circulation of precautionary measures, encouraging social isolation, encouraging social distancing, using hand sanitizers that were bought and given to staff in all offices. But as we headed on and into the scenario where we had more people now, cases registered in the country, these were more advanced strategies were adopted. We had to devise and develop a pandemic implementation plan that was looking at critical services that could be maintained. And this pandemic implementation plan was really outlining critical activities that that had to be maintained even as the country entered into a lockdown. And this is where I was mentioning that issues to do with connections had to continue. But internally, the staff needed, we proactively had to pay their salaries in time to ensure that if they needed to buy sanitizers or need to buy food and stock up, then they had the necessary funding available. So salaries were paid on time. Health insurance companies were engaged to ensure that in case there was any staff exposed, then they would be on standby to provide insurance for their health cover. We cancelled all meetings that were with outside stakeholders who were not sure that they have either they have faced a contagion or they have been exposed. To encourage working from home, as in the talk now, all staff have been sent home, working remotely from their homes, except from the critical staff that must be on the front line, who I can call the frontline staff. These are technicians and wiremen to ensure that faults on the network are easily addressed from now and again. We had to import PPE equipment and masks for staff that were to stay in offices and work, and then worked out a leave structure for staff that were voluntarily offering to take leave during this period so that they can feel secure and more safe. But above that, there was encouragement from a humanitarian perspective, sending out messages to staff to manage their anxiety and worry, trying to emphasize safety, hand washing, limit the amount of information you consume, because in Africa, really, fake news is so rampant and it's easy to cause anxiety in a short span of time. Of course, offered the platform and numbers to call the human resource department to encourage staff to not get fake information, and all sorts of the other support kind of information that you can get from the management. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much. What I'd like to do now is start addressing some of the questions that we've been getting in. And the first one I'd like to take a look at was from Alfred. Alfred mentioned that there are a number of utilities really all around the world, looking at various forms of bill relief for their customers, deferrals, forgivenesses, that type of thing. How have those discussions been? Have they either progressed or been implemented in Uganda?
So Alfred's question is a comparing question in a low-developed country where people's incomes are sensitive to such pandemic scenarios. And of course, it comes through the media most because the media is the main mouthpiece of these people. And there's a push that the utility should give free electricity since they are no longer working, they don't have businesses to earn an income from. We've listened to the journalists and several civil society organizations that are pushing for this free electricity. From a business perspective, it is a bit complex because you have debt obligations that must be honored at the end of the year or end of the day. You have commitments to shareholders who expect a dividend to earn. You have suppliers who are supplying you with equipment that you must pay. So putting all this into perspective, I don't think the utility has the mandate, neither does the regulator have the mandate to give free energy to these disadvantaged groups. However, this can be raised to to the authority. In Uganda's case, this discussion is still ongoing, and there is people that are pushing for this to happen with the president. And I think the president, of course, will have to engage with the cabinet to decide on whether such a decision will have to be taken. But coming into looking at it from the context of the country, we only have 44 registered cases. So these numbers right now are still considered not so high to alarm and cause alarm and cause such drastic measures of giving free electricity. But in any case, if it happens, it will have to be done through within the existing laws. So if a president gives a directive with the cabinet that energy should be given, then Parliament has to appropriate, amend the Energy Act and ensure that there is a legal backing for such a decision to be made. Otherwise, you don't want to be on the wrong side of the law as a regulator or as a utility later on when you're asked to account how a certain energy was not billed and collected.
That actually ties very nicely into our next question from Ram from Nepal. He's asking, how do we go about quantifying the impact and the risk of COVID-19 and use that to inform our short and long-term strategies, all the while being mindful of, ultimately the financial sustainability of the utility? I mean, you said, like, right now, 44 cases, but certainly there's, in any country, there's a potential to grow. So, who's involved in figuring out that trade-off?
So the utility, Umeme is actually right now tracking the load profiles of different customer groups and the load shapes, trying to understand how the lockdown and the curfew is causing the shift in these various load profiles. Then we can track the gap between the projected sales in the country and what we actually selling. And of course, that will filter through the pricing methodology and quantify how much of that would have been energy sold and what was the actual outturn. And this will inform whether there is a need for a revenue compensation through the tariff or through the directly through the government. Yeah, so it's the utility, and I must emphasize that regulators, wherever you are, and utility operators, please try to, as much as possible, track the load profiles and load consumption patterns of the different customers that you have to make informed policy and management decisions that you take later on.
So, you mentioned that one of the things that you said in kind of your opening remarks is the types of things that you're doing today are different from the types of things you were doing just a week ago, because this is an evolving situation. We really don't know. You hear a lot about this idea of flattening the curve, but the fact is nobody really knows where that curve is going to peak or when. So in Uganda, how is this working group the primary source of taking these plans, taking these initiatives, and modifying them over time to fit the evolving situation? Is that the framework, or do you have some other strategy for changing the types of things that you're doing as need be, as things evolve?
Yes, so the joint task force that I mentioned about is headed by someone from the Ministry of Health, for the Minister of Health actually. So they advise on the next course of activities depending on the scale of infections worldwide, globally, and nationally. So they are the chief advisors on what actions need to be taken. And then these are then cascaded down to different sectors, representatives, institutions. And as Umeme as a utility, we have representation on that committee. So for things that actually relate to the energy sector, say we've agreed that all hospitals must have uninterrupted supply 24/7. Then that representative, of course, relays the information through the company, and it's assigned to responsible staff to ensure that there's reliable supply to all hospitals. The same applies to the security personnel. So we've heard of measures discouraging the soldiers from moving outside the barracks as well. But the same applies to even the water sector. So the structure of the flow of information and precautionary measures being taken starts from that joint task force that is headed by the Ministry of Health and has representation from the World Health Organization. And then this is, of course, then filtered to the respective institutions who then devise relevant strategies for their respective institution.
Thank you, Peter. We've got another question from Sydney, asking about earlier in your presentation, you mentioned the different roles in the supply chain. Has the current crisis changed the way either Umeme or the transmission company or the producers, has it changed the way they source different materials, different supplies? And if so, how did you go about making some of those decisions to source things a little bit differently?
Thank you very much. Yes, it has affected the way we source for materials, because I can say that previously we've had most of our framework contracts for key spare materials and equipment imported from China, because China is the cheap source of manufacturing and products shipped into a country. And now we've had to reevaluate and say we have our local companies that can manufacture cable, that can manufacture conductors, that can manufacture spare parts. And so we are taking a swift shift to buy some of those locally manufactured goods, equipment. And so, yes, it's drastic. It's proactive, because the intent is to ensure that we don't run out of critical materials to use. But we are doing this more now online and having to engage airlines to ship some of these materials where we would have used shipping from China. The delay of sending containers over the ocean would take longer than, so we've had to use cargo planes to ship in some of these equipment, meters and all that stuff. So yes, there is a reality that you have to be proactive, change the way you've been procuring certain things, and ensure you have adequate stock, that you can deliver good service.
All right, thank you very much. I know we're at our time, and we're trying to be, as we've said, very mindful of everyone's time. We really appreciate the time you've set aside to join us in this discussion. The last thing The last thing I kind of want to ask, it's kind of a general question, is how do you see this crisis? Do you see it changing Umeme in any way once it's passed? Because as difficult it is to see today, it will pass. Do you see any far-reaching changes for Umeme? Is it going to be a different company after all this?
Yes, it's going to be a different company after all this, in so many ways. Who could have thought that you can have over 1,000 staff working from home? But now it's going to have this staff have been facilitated with internet connections and data bundles to work from home, given laptops to use to ensure there is continuity in work. That is a big change in the way of doing business. Secondly, the feedback that we are getting from customers also emphasizes the importance of the service we are giving. So ensuring that reliability is guaranteed 24/7. I think it's going to give a heightened note of sense of urgency in all the activities that we are doing. But above all, I wanted to say something I said on the force majeure provisions of the contract that we have. So for viewers and listeners out there, if you're working under a concession contract or a management contract, or even if it's a performance contract, this is the time to look at force majeure provisions of your contract and see what it provides. Well, are you protected? What can you do in such an instance? Does it provide for compensation mechanism for you? Does it expose you to all these risks? Do you have obligations to meet at the end of the year, and will they be waived or not? So I think that's the other angle that you have to look at as an operator. Yeah.
And then just sorry, because we had a follow-up from Sydney, who asked about the sourcing. What about what about some of these changes in sourcing? Do you see them becoming kind of the new norm for Umeme?
Sorry, come again. In sourcing?
Some of the changes that you outlined in the way you're sourcing
yes.
some of the materials. Do you see that becoming part of the new norm, or is it just a temporary or a transition measure?
It's both. For some materials that we have opted to buy locally, I think the split is going to be 50-50. There will be those who will demonstrate that they can actually supply good equipment, so we'll stick with them and support them. They've made a strong case to say, look, guys, we've always told you we can produce and supply this equipment locally. You need to support us under the Uganda policy, buy Uganda, build Uganda. But the other one of purchasing equipment in bulk from Europe or China or Japan or India, I think the intermediate ones, or the short-term means of using aircraft to ship in equipment, is really going to be only apply as long as the pandemic persists. But if it's contained, then we'll have to resort back to the conventional means. Otherwise, it's more expensive airlifting equipment from all these parts of the world. Yeah.
And then one last question before we open things up to everybody. And will you be able to stick around for a little bit to offer your reactions? Great. Yeah. Eileen from the Philippines was asking about the role of fixed charges, on the in the rate structure. Are fixed charges a significant part of the bill in Uganda, or is it primarily usage based?
No, they are not. They are not. They are an insignificant portion of the bill, really. It's just it's a very insignificant amount that is, I may say it's insignificant because I am me, I don't know, maybe to some other consumers it may be a lot, but I think overall it's an insignificant portion of the user charges. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I guess Rebecca, at this point, we are gonna. I'll turn things over to you. I think any folks that going to be sharing some experiences with us. We have a couple more questions if need be, but certainly if there are things that folks want to contribute, that would be terrific.
Yeah, I think what we'll do, I have one, hopefully Ram's available right now. I'll unmute him shortly, but there is a feature for everyone. If you go to the participants tab, I believe is where you can then sort of raise your hand. So if you can do that, if you would like to speak. But earlier in the chat, Ram, who's in Nepal, was talking about a digital dashboard that's been created. And so I think we were gonna try to hear from him a little bit more on that digital dashboard.
Okay, great.
Hi, Ram.
Hey, hi. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. So thank you very much. I mean, what we have actually created in Nepal is, we've been in lockdown. It's been more than 10 days since now, the government has actually introduced this kind of curfew, so to say. We are not allowed to go out. We need to work from home, and the Deputy Prime Minister, under the leadership of him, a big committee has been created, and under each ministry, ministry has established a separate kind of leadership team. So this leadership team meets, every alternative days. This is basically a kind of virtual meeting. One of the issue, one of the new things that we've, started in modifying our, information management system. Ask the utility to change their, the information collection center. Since we have only one distribution utility, this utility has, more than 1,400, distribution center. The collection center, basically these are, what you call it, distribution network. They are meant for, visiting, people, collecting bills, verifying meters and all those kind of things. And then to address the, because of the social distancing, because of the movement restrictions, all those things, they've been given, everybody has got smartphone, and their informations are fed into the national, information systems. That will, there are critical points, the IT, the experts has designed a dashboard where the critical information systems, where we need to focus. These are, what you call it, kind of, these are displayed at the, leaders' computer. So these are the area you need to actually address. So that's how, which area needs to be, prioritized in terms of, load setting, in terms of load balancing, in terms of, this pandemic, spread and all those things. These I just wanted to share with you. This is one part. Another thing also, the government very recently, yesterday's cabinet meeting, they decided to, give a kind of, 25%, free, right? You don't need to pay. Your bill will be reduced by 25%. And utility just called this morning, to us saying that, how do you do this, right? Regulator, you need to listen the, government's, decision. But at the same time, utility is saying, I don't have money. So how do you balance? Maybe Ted or, Mark can, suggest us something, for Nepal.
Thank you, Ram. Yeah, it's you know, as Peter mentioned, there's that trade-off between, you know, offering relief to customers, but then the need for financial sustainability. You know, Eileen shared in the chat that in the Philippines, they're basically deferring payments. So, you know, what the utility is giving up is more just the time value of the money. They're still going to get paid. It's just going to come at some point after. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the financial sustainability, you know, you want to make sure that once this is all done, you know, you still have a financially sustainable utility. And the fact is, you know, those of you who've been to our courses and you've heard me talk, you know, one of the things I always talk about is the people always pay all the cost of providing service. You know, sometimes it's through the bill, sometimes it's through other ways, but they do always pay. And the importance of that financial sustainability and the recognition of that is very important. So thank you. That's a great great initiative, and certainly, yeah, as Mark likes to say, that's why you as the regulator get paid the big bucks, right? Because you have all these decisions. All right.
All right. I'm gonna,
Rebecca, we want to go to Imran.
Yep, Imran's the Senior Executive Director for the Oil and Gas Regulatory Authority in Pakistan.
Hello. Are you here? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi. I don't know if you can see me or not. Can you see me?
I can't see you quite yet, but we can hear you well. So if you want to just continue, that would be great.
That's great. Hi, everyone. Actually, I just wanted to share our experience because this working from home, using emails for approvals, because we were basically a conventional organization where file moves, we used to sign, send it for the approvals. So for this second week, we are just going through most of our executives and authority are working from home. So the experience is very good, excellent. We are basically working, having meetings through Skype, group WhatsApps we have created for departments and for the authority, and we are seeking approvals from them. Working is very smooth. And as far as the employees are concerned, we have made a committee, which is being headed by myself, for the safety and security of all the employees regarding this COVID-19. So we are taking all necessary measures to protect them, provide them masks, sanitizers, fumigation of offices, and even, God forbid, if somebody gets affected, then we have made all the arrangements that how to test them, how to help them, how to support the family. So we are looking after it, all these dynamics. And most of all, the experience is very good. But one thing which I just wanted to share is that because this is a new experience, so employees are under stress because of the overall environment. And then through calls, so there's an emotional element, and it is very interesting to see that how to handle that that employees, engaged employees, because everybody's in stress. And then while discussing, when once you're in the face-to-face meetings, it's always you manage with it. But over the telephones, over the WhatsApp or Skype, so there is an element of controlling the emotions. So this is which is very interesting, which I have noticed. And in fact, whenever this situation will be over, we will try to conduct this emotional management or control courses for our employees to cope up this type of situation in the future.
Well, thank you.
That's it.
Thank you very much for contributing. It sounds like, yeah, I mean, this is as you know, Peter mentioned in his in his remarks, you know, this interagency working group for Uganda came together very quickly, and you know, as we've been mentioning on a number of these on our web series, you know, a lot of a lot of this response is coming together very quickly, and it's just, I mean, it's terrific, you know, to hear from my perspective, you know, how quickly and imaginatively and decisively folks are coming together with their plans on how to deal with something that we really haven't seen of this scope, you know, at least in any of our lifetimes. So it's great to hear these, you know, these different initiatives and, you know, from all these different countries on how we're dealing with this. Rebecca, do we have anybody else? Anybody else in the queue?
Yeah, I was gonna unmute Eileen,
Great.
if she's there. Hi, Eileen. She had some comments, I believe, about bill estimations.
Great, great.
Yes. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to share our experience here in the Philippines. We are on our third week of quarantine now, and we have been having problems with bills because under the rules of the regulator, we can issue bill estimates, which is based on the previous month, 3 months consumption. But as you know, the previous 3 months is not reflective of their consumption right now, especially the big businesses which have closed down. The big malls are closed already. So the bill estimate would be really high. And that would be a problem if the government will actually extend the quarantine, because right now we have about 2,600 COVID cases, and it's been still rising. We haven't plateaued yet, and I personally am expecting that the quarantine will be extended for another month. So bill estimates is an issue for us because I'm sure the customers will clamor for lower bills. And for the residential, most of the meters are not remotely read. So that is a big issue, another big issue. So we have plenty of operational problems right now, aside from the financial, because we have deferred payments. We allow deferred payments for our customers because it was actually a directive from the Department of Energy. Customers can pay after 30 days when the quarantine is lifted. So here in the Philippines, the utility, the industry is not vertically integrated. So generation and supply is competitive, and transmission and distribution are private companies. So as a distribution utility, we have pass-through costs, generation, transmission, and all the rest of the public policy charges are passed through for the utility. But now we have to pay our suppliers. The distribution part of the bill is only about less than 20%. That is what actually goes to the utility. But we have to pay the 80% to the suppliers. So that would be a big burden in terms of cash flow for the distribution utility.
Eileen, this is Ted. Just a quick question. How do the bill deferrals work for customers on prepaid meters?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure. How do the bill deferrals work for customers on prepaid meters?
Oh, on prepaid meters. I'm not really sure for prepaid meters, but I think it's not applicable for prepaid meters right now.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Maybe to add on that, Ted.
Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, so it's difficult to do bill deferrals for prepaid metering technology. In Uganda, all the domestic connections, all the large industrial customers are on prepaid metering, even factories and industries and prepaid metering. the commercials, we're using AMR technology for most of the commercial customers. So the proportion of those we still have on postpaid meters is about 230 customers out of, can imagine, the customer base of 1.4 million customers. So that's a small number. That's why I said those we will do bill estimations. But ordinarily, it's very difficult to give to do bill deferrals for technologies using prepaid meters. The other thing I wanted to mention about is some lady who asked about what support have we got from the regulator. I think the biggest support and the circumstances right now you can get from the regulator is approval and no objections to the proactive and innovation that you're trying to put across, even if it's somehow against the regulations. For example, if you have to, the regulations specify you must send a team of 5 people to resolve an outage, a complaint a technical fault in a substation. In the current circumstances, you say we only send 2. So I think the flexibility that the regulator gives or grants in you being able to make modifications and changes in the way you do things is very critical. But all this can only be achieved if you're engaging directly in discussions. I'm not saying face-to-face, but you can do Skype meeting, team calls, and keep the regulator updated on whatever proposals you intend to do. The other comment I was relating to the question raised by one of the participants on how has Umeme changed and how is it going to change going forward. I think it was you, Ted, actually, who raised it. I think the other angle to it is that you're seeing a lot of shift from paperwork and doing most of the stuff online and digital messaging and documentation and filing of documents, as opposed to the previous few weeks, just a draft shift from whereas I would have sent you a box file of so much paperwork, now I only have to get them scanned and email them to you, which is another good improvement. Then, of course, as utilities, you need to scale down on your staffing requirements and ensure you only have the critical frontline staff in the field right now. Ensure that faults are resolved as soon as possible, otherwise you get a backlash from the journalists, from the media, on how you're incompetent to resolve outages in a crisis. So engaging the media and ensuring the critical frontline staff are well facilitated with motorcycles, with pickup trucks or vehicles, with a limit on number of people they are supposed to carry. In Uganda, it's now in a maximum of 1 person per vehicle. So putting all those in place is helpful. Make sure that you maintain your legitimacy.
Thank you. Rebecca, do we have anything else in the queue?
I think we might close here with just Patrick. Patrick had a quick question, and I was going to, Patrick, if you're there, I'll unmute you if you would like to maybe just give a little more context behind your question.
Yeah. In the Philippines, the 2 concessionaires for the water utility are requesting authority to pay their frontline workers hazard pay. So what do you think about this?
Requesting to pay the workers as
hazard pay for having to report to work when things are dangerous.
Yes.
Has that come up for Umeme?
Has come in for Umeme because we said our call center must remain open. So the call center staff are still working. Our technicians in the field doing the fault resolutions have raised it also, saying they are moving to various homes and they're not so sure where they are likely to get contagion from. So yeah, I think that will be considered soon, because it's a reality that the rate of contagion for those particular linesmen and call center staff may be higher than the other people who are remotely working from home. So there is consideration. It will probably maybe come through next week. So yeah.
All right. Well, certainly. Thank you so much, Peter, for joining us today and all of your all of your insights, all of your stories. Thank you to all of you for your participation today. We hope that you join us for our next practices in the web series. We'll be joined by the CEO of Manila Water. Mark will be hosting that either later on today or tomorrow, depending on where you are. But really, from all of us here, thank you for joining us, and mostly thank you for all of your efforts, all of the things that you do every day to improve utility service for people in every corner of the globe. Stay safe, everyone. I'll turn things back over to Rebecca for some closing thoughts.
Thank you, everyone.